Thank you so much for your patience. We're going to go ahead and begin. Welcome to the final round of the 3-minute presentations. We're so excited that you're here. Again, everybody that came in should have gotten a ballot. With these, we will be counting up your votes at the end, and you will help decide who the winner of the $600 in prizes will be. So, thank you for coming and voting. Before we begin our 3-minute presentations, we're actually going to be hearing from two of our professors here, Jamin Rowan and Gideon Burton, who are going to be talking about the English Plus initiative. Following them, we're going to hear two students share their personal experiences with this initiative and what it has done for them. So, give a round of applause for Jamin and Professor Burton.
Okay, some of you heard this yesterday, but some of you didn't. So in case you weren't aware, the English department has begun an English Plus initiative this past year. And for all those who have declared the English major this year and will do so going forward, they will be required to have an English Plus experience. So as you see on this graph, or this little map here, there's a curricular requirement now in the major that requires that students have an English Plus experience. Oftentimes that will come in the form of an internship when you take 399R as you're doing that internship. But there are other ways to achieve that experience. The English department has a new course, 394R, and then there are other on-campus experiences that will allow that requirement to be satisfied. We also want to continue to encourage extracurricular experiences that will do two things, and these are the buzzwords for the English Plus initiative: translate and narrate. So we really want our English majors to have opportunities outside the classroom to better understand and learn how their skills that they develop inside the classroom translate to those experiences. We feel that our major prepares you to do a lot of different things. It's just that those things maybe aren't as legible to you and to others as maybe some other fields. We also want you to learn through those experiences as you're figuring out how your skills translate to outside environments, to learn how to narrate the value of your skills to other people, prospective employers, other community members, church communities. So we are excited to hear this morning from two students who've had opportunities to translate and narrate their English skills, and encourage you to do that same, whether or not you are required to do so by the new English Plus initiative. Thanks.
Just to follow up on what Dr. Rowan was saying, the English Society has been trying to make efforts to give students the opportunity to narrate their experiences with extracurricular sorts of things and applied English. One of those ways is that we have made the My Story podcast. In fact, our host for that podcast is going to be one of our presenters in just a minute, Davis Blount. And he's done a great job of interviewing people that have been on internships or various interesting study abroad experiences, or found interesting ways of applying their English degree while being an at-home mom. We've had a great range of alumni and current students that have gone onto this program, and we invite you to consider coming on and telling your story. It's really a lot of fun, and Davis is pretty friendly, aren't you? On good days. And then also we have been recording. Last year we recorded the 5-minute presentations like the ones you're about to hear, and they are up on our YouTube channel. We'll do the same thing with these ones today. And so another way that you can have access to your peers who are going through various applied English experiences and hear what they've done. It really is helpful to hear how others have figured out how to do it, and it's less painful to figure it out when you see people just a little bit ahead of you have figured it out. So we are going to now, yesterday we heard from Kurt Anderson and Justin Shaw and Maddie Markle and Elizabeth Barton, and they gave some very interesting experiences. And then today we'll be hearing from first Anna Gee and then Davis Blount. Let me introduce this format for you. Unlike the 3-minute presentations that you're about to hear mostly, which are just 3 minutes and one slide, this is adapted from the Picha Kucha format, Japanese presentation format. It's 5 minutes, 20 slides that advance automatically every 15 seconds. So it makes for a really lively presentation and takes a lot of practice, but I think these guys are doing well with that. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and let Anna take over.
So after hundreds of hours of homework, LSAT prep, and law school applications, I was recently accepted to Harvard Law School. And friends and family have been congratulating me and asking, so what are you going to do next? How are you feeling about it? And honestly, I don't know the answer. As my parents can attest, they're both attorneys. It's been very hard for me to decide to go to law school, and a lot of things are still very ambiguous. I guess I'm worried about becoming the next Elle Woods of 2016 with how nervous I am about going to Harvard in the fall. And I know that no matter where I end up in the fall, I'll still be wondering, will I ever figure out what I want to be when I grow up? My future is definitely ambiguous. But today I want to talk about why I'm okay with ambiguity because of my English major, my economics minor, and the gospel of Jesus Christ in the courses here at BYU. To be or not to be is a question that English majors have all faced at one time or another. My English major has taught me that asking questions and increasing ambiguity is actually more rewarding than extinguishing it. On one occasion, I was analyzing the culpability of Eve in Milton's Paradise Lost. And as I delved into scholarship, I realized that there were arguments on both sides for Eve's guilt and her innocence. And this led me to ask more questions and to really complicate my thesis. Ultimately, I ended up writing a totally different paper. And this and many other papers have taught me that we don't try to fit our paper to our thesis, but actually we adjust our thesis to fit our paper. If we're not comfortable facing new questions or dealing with new scholarship that we come in contact with, we stop progressing. In a similar way, my econ minors helped me to deal with uncertainty. Last semester, I took an econometrics course, and I was talking about regressions with a professor. Regressions are where you measure the effect of one variable on another, holding certain exterior factors constant. And I noted to my professor that it must be frustrating to have to go through all this work trying to find a significant correlation and then have to go back to the drawing board and look for different variables. But he responded that that is just part of the process. It's just a stepping stone in the process to finding significant variables. And that's one of the reasons that I like econ, is because it forces me to re-examine assumptions that I've made about behaviors and to continue asking questions. Just like English, econ pushes me to keep trying. And my professor also noted that we don't fit the data to our thesis, but we fit the thesis to the data. So this has pushed me to keep trying in that way. And I think it's very similar in the gospel. The gospel pushes us to keep asking questions, which helps us to progress as we go down that path. I had the opportunity to serve as a missionary on Temple Square. And one night when I was on my mission, I was with a companion, and we noticed a man that looked very concerned sitting on a bench, and we sat down to talk with him. And as I talked to him, I learned that this man's homosexuality had put a wedge in his marriage and led to divorce and substance abuse and homelessness. And he was obviously very troubled. And as I shared scriptures with him and talked with him like missionaries do, I realized that I wasn't really able to solve these problems that he was facing, and that was very difficult for me to deal with. But later that week, I was reading in Mosiah 18 in the Book of Mormon, and I made a discovery that's really helped me to deal with ambiguity since that time. In this chapter, God asks us to mourn with those that mourn and comfort those that stand in need of comfort. But he never asks us to solve these people's problems or provide solutions for them. As I thought about this man that I talked with earlier in the week, I realized that I had done just that for him. I'd been there for him, listened to him, and loved him. And he didn't need me to provide a solution. He just needed me to be there. And I know that the Savior does that for us as well. And so in that sense, I think the gospel helps us to continue asking questions. Even though I don't know why this man had to go through this particular trial, I know that God will give me answers as I continue to ask questions line upon line. So in summary, I don't know what I'm doing I don't know what I'll be doing in 5 years, and I don't really even know what I'll be doing in 5 months. But I'm really grateful for my English major, my economics minor, and the gospel of Jesus Christ, because I've learned that uncertainty is a fact of life. not only a fact of life, but it's something that makes life really worth living. And because of the skills that I have as an English major, I'll be comfortable adjusting the thesis of my life forever. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Davis Blount, and I'm excited to share with you all my experiences applying English Plus. And basically what I want to get across to you all is that when you have a passion and add to it technical skills, that you'll be able to succeed. I started my freshman year as a political science major, hoping to carry on the proud tradition of Atticus Finch and Matthew McConaughey and the Lincoln Lawyer, and soon found that that wasn't my path. I fortunately had 2 years of reprieve serving a mission to the Philippines, where I learned the Bisaya language, and I very quickly fell in love with the land, the people, the culture, and everything. And I was lucky enough to find some friends who shared those same passions. We began to ask ourselves, how can we take this love that we have and bring it back with us to America and keep it a part of our lives beyond these 2 years that we have to live in the Philippines? And our first idea was to make a video. So we, using the Bisaya language that we learned on our mission, made a video on YouTube, hoping that it might get passed around some of our friends that we had made on the mission, and we quickly found that it became a lot more. In a matter of days, there were national Filipino news agencies and reporters reaching out to us, wondering who we were and why these big white Americans knew Bisaya. And we decided that we would keep doing it. I did have a gnawing question in the pit of my stomach, which was, how am I going to take this fun experience that I'm having and put it on a resume? I can't say I make YouTube videos and expect employers to come running. But regardless, we decided to plan a return tour to the Philippines. And as we were doing that, I was sending inquiry emails, sending business proposals, writing up contracts, and doing a lot of other things. And I began to ask myself, isn't this English Plus? I'm doing the things that my professors want me to be doing outside of the classroom while still pursuing some of my passions. I was able to write up proposals like that and found very quickly that my skills as a technical writer were increasing just by trying to forward some of the passions that I had. I'm glad to say that our tour to the Philippines went very well. We were able to interact with thousands of our fans and saw very quickly that this was a legitimate opportunity, something that we could capitalize on, both to continue showing our passion and living it, but also as a business. And I learned very quickly that passion plus the technical skills that we gain in our classes lead to marketable skills and experiences that will make us more attractive candidates for future jobs. When I got back from the Philippines, I started wondering, what else am I passionate about? How else can I take the skills that I'm learning in my English classes and turn them into English Plus experiences? One of the things that I am very passionate about is music, particularly the local music scene. So on a whim, I started a blog called Analog Provo and sent hundreds of messages to local artists asking for interview opportunities or asking to review albums, and started hearing back from some. Because of Analog Provo, I've been able to interact and become friends with Mindy and Dustin Gledhill for their project Hive Riot, Mimi Knowles, Mojave Nomads, New Shack, and dozens of other bands that I had looked up to for so long. My big break came, in a sense, when I was able to meet Court Mann, the A&E editor at the Daily Herald. He said that he had seen some of the things that I was writing, really liked what I was doing, and offered me a freelance position to write for the Herald. Since then, I've been able to see many of my interviews published in print and online as part of the Daily Herald, and have been able to beef up my professional writing portfolio in a different and kind of diverse way. So you might be wondering how this all ties back to me being a lawyer. I still have aspirations to be Atticus Finch, to bring seersucker back to the courthouse, and to fight for justice. And while many of my experiences haven't led directly to law school, I am confident that I have the skills needed to impress law schools and potential employers. I know that I have a diverse set of skills and that, quite frankly, I'm an interesting candidate, someone that someone would want to talk to. I would encourage each of you to take a hard look at yourselves and ask yourselves, what are your passions, and how you would be able to take the English skills that you learn in the classroom and apply it to the things that you love. Thank you.
Thank you, Davis and Anna, for sharing your experiences. That is absolutely wonderful. English Plus really does help us take our English major out to the world and make an impact. Okay, the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to have our presenters come up again and show us not only their amazing skills, but their wonderful research topics and all the work that they've put into these papers. As a reminder, we are encouraging you to use social media. So as you see these presenters up here giving their heart and soul into their presentations, go ahead and live tweet it. You have our permission to take pictures, post it up. We would love to see what you are seeing and to see what is standing out to you. Please use our hashtag that we've been using for this entire symposium. It's hashtag BYU IngSymp. ENGSYMP 16. So BYU IngSymp 16. And we'd love to see your interactions on these different social media platforms. Now, presenters, you've done this before. You can do this again. Remember, it's strictly timed. Look up front for your cues. Good luck. You'll do great. Let's give them a round of applause.
Okay, so when I was thinking of a topic for my Shakespeare paper, I was like, what topic has not been rehashed over and over again when it comes to Shakespeare? So I'm bouncing back ideas with some friends, and I get a message, and essentially my friend goes, well, was he a lover or was he a cynic? I was like, he was a cynic. So I did a close reading of some of his plays, one of which was A Midsummer Night's Dream, where I looked at the different humor and exaggerations within the play and how they showed the fleetingness, the instability, and the superficial nature of infatuation or love. Well, in A Midsummer Night's Dream, we have the scene where Demetrius is affected by Puck when he uses a magical flower to make him fall in love with whoever he sees first when he wakes up. Well, this scene represents the trope of love at first sight. Well, with all this ridiculousness that happens when he wakes up and sees Helena, immediately falls in love with her after exclaiming that he would never fall in love with her and he hates her. This exaggeration, this humor shows that the love at first sight could not happen unless an impossible, outside, unnatural force acts upon the players or the lovers in play. Also in this scene, we've got Demetrius boasting about his love for Helena and how she is this goddess, this nymph, and how crystals are muddy compared to her eyes. And these exaggerations of his passion also is like a satire that makes fun of the passion that we always associate with love. Well, towards the end of the play, we have the famous Pyramus and Thisbe scene, where the laborers put on this play based on what they assume the aristocrats think love is. Well, everything goes awry and becomes this big comedy that the aristocrats laugh at. Now, the aristocrats in this scene actually represent the audience watching A Midsummer Night's Dream, because the audience, while watching this love story unfold, laughing at it the entire time, while believing that these representations are what they define love as, become the people who are laughing at this play, laughing at their own beliefs, therefore laughing at themselves. Shakespeare has the audience essentially making fun of themselves. I've done some other close readings of other plays, like As You Like It, where we've got the kiss being compared to an orator spitting when he has nothing else to say. So, after looking at these, is Shakespeare in love or not? And my conclusion is that he was not. Thank you.
Raymond Carver's short story Cathedral was published in 1981 and details the unique encounter between a pessimistic narrator and his wife's blind friend. Now, much of the critical debate surrounding this piece concerns whether or not this encounter is ultimately redemptive for the narrator or whether it merely perpetuates a negative worldview. Now, we hear the title cathedral and we can't really escape the religious connotations. So when we read the story, we're surprised to find that not only is it not religious, it's in fact post-religious, and many of the characters are struggling to find meaning in this post-secular world. So it's not a story about religion, it's not even a story about the loss of religion. It's a story about coping with a religious legacy once religion has already been lost. And our narrator, this man sort of entrenched in this nihilistic lifestyle, is our unlikely champion in this quest for meaning. And the catalyst for this quest is when the narrator is sitting down with this blind man and they're watching this program about cathedrals. And he asks him to describe the cathedrals for him. And the narrator tries, but he fails. He can't do it, and he claims he can't do it because he's not religious, and religion isn't really important to him. So the blind man asks him to draw a picture instead, and they'll draw it together, and the narrator will close his eyes, and they'll both sort of blindly explore this cathedral together. And whilst they're engaged in this enterprise, the blind man insists that our narrator put people into his image of the cathedral, and that's when he says this telling remark, "What is a cathedral without people?" And this is where I argue that the text becomes unhinged. It's no longer about the narrator, instead it's about these broader social and philosophic issues. And this blind man is no longer merely a blind man, he's a blind prophet. And he is bringing these ideas of belief into conflict with the nihilistic nature of the world. And at the end of the story, our narrator is torn between his nihilistic lifestyle and this desire to believe in something. And that idea of something is a word that is repeated often throughout the end of the story. Not necessarily religion, but just wanting to believe in something. And so ultimately, it's not necessarily about whether the narrator finds redemption in the end. The story is about setting up this dialogue between nihilism and belief. Thank you.
Okay, I want you all to visualize the following sentence. The petal fell onto the ground. Now, am I referring to the petal of a flower, P-E-T-A-L, or the petal on a bike, P-E-D-A-L? This was the focus of my research. I wanted to see what affects our homophone perception, specifically to see if gender affects our homophone perception. In linguistics, gender differences in language are called genderlex. So to test this theory, I enlisted 30 participants, 15 of each gender, and I played a recording of a homophone for them. I then asked them to write the first sentence that came to their mind with whichever homophone they perceived. So for example, I would play the word sell, and they would write something down like, I sell books, or the prisoner in the jail cell. However, after analyzing my data, the results were not statistically significant enough to prove that gender affects homophone perception. It just happens sometimes. However, I did notice a different pattern that was very interesting. Females were much more likely to be specific in their responses. For example, they specified what they ate, what was being sold, or who the prince was, and it was often Prince Charming. So these results we can see in this graph on the left here. So let's take the first one. 8 women specified exactly what they were eating, while only 4 men did the same. In most cases, women were 2 times more likely to be specific in their sentences compared to their male counterparts. So why is this important? Why does this matter? In linguistics, there's a long-standing theory that men are socialized to use language to establish power, while women are socialized to use language to build solidarity. And we can see this dynamic on the graph on the right. Unfortunately, This has resulted in women being perceived as linguistically inferior because they don't use language to establish dominance, but rather build community. However, this is simply not the case. Specificity is a linguistic feature that is a positive attribute. We can all benefit from clearer communication. And if we can find positive and impactful features in females' language use while finding the same in males' language use, then it shows both genders can become equal in how they build relationships with others and also how they contribute to society and the world as a whole. Both genders have value, and in different ways, they can both help make the world a better place. Thank you.
I converted my essay into a slam poem, so feel free to snap, but don't get too crazy. Sense, from the Latin sensus, which means the faculty of feeling, thinking, and meaning. We are told that we have 5 senses, but recently I read 45 essays and I began to notice the word sense was linked with other parts of the human experience. Sense of freedom, sense of time, sense of adventure, a sense of dark autumn night, sense of a new day dawning, sense of order, sense of coming thunder, sense of humor. Maybe we can better understand sense by looking at its function as a root word. If I were to set up 2 identical movie theaters today, one showing a Nicholas Sparks movie and one Michael Bay, the Sparks would have a giggly romance until they die of cancer, change their mind, or move away. There would be soft music and lots of used tissues at the end. It would be sentimental. The Bay movie would have monsters, robots, aliens, with lots and lots of explosions and beautiful women. There would be loud music and a slight deafness at the end. It would be sensational. If we hooked both audiences up to machines, we would see the physiological responses of overactive senses in both of them. Yet sentimental is seen as negative and sappy, while sensational is seen as vivid and exciting. Maybe sense is physical and sentiment is emotional, but if we limit sense to just what we feel physically and sentiment just to what we feel emotionally, then what about physical pain? It can't be deemed a sentimentality, but it's not something you can see, smell, hear, taste, or touch. In actuality, physical pain and emotional pain both light up the same parts of the brain. So why do we treat emotions with disdain and tell people to put their chins up and change? We gain some sense through our senses. I know that lion cub fur catches in the ridges of your fingers. I know that New York sounds like sirens and swearing. I know that pizza is the best thing I've ever tasted. But once when I was 8, I licked an ice cube tray, my tongue stuck, and I still have a scar from when I pulled away, and some may say that it was against common sense. Is common sense something that each person is inherently born with? Do we add to it every time we do something dumb so the next person knows not to do it? Does it vary across cultures, ethnicity, genders, and ages? Is it a book passed around and you have to memorize every page or else risk showing the world that wisdom isn't necessarily contagious? Because I think that we should be allowed to make our own mistakes without hearing the sage, well, isn't it common sense? Sensibility is used to describe rationality, but my physical senses preach against it. When I see a rainstorm, I toss on a swimsuit and rain boots and plow through puddles as fast as I can. I'm feeling the raindrops against my skin. I'm feeling joy as I search for the biggest puddles. I'm not thinking about pneumonia or towels or tracking mud through my mother's house. It's strange to me how simple this 5-letter word sense, how many meanings this 5-letter word sense has come to mean. Sensitive, sensational, sentimental, sensible, nonsense, common sense, sensorial, sensual, sensuous, sensitized, senseless, sense.
Last semester, one of my classes studied a book by Anthony Doerr called All the Light We Cannot See. It was published in 2015, and it discusses the effects of World War II on a small French village called Saint-Malo. As we were studying this book, we took the primary focus of truth and remembrance and how those things impact our society and impact our perceptions and our actions. As I was studying this book, my perception of the material and the title changed drastically. I started to question why the book was called All the Light We Cannot See when it seemed more like the characters would not see. They chose not to see. They rejected that truth. Werner, who is a young German boy, recruited into the Nazi youth program, and he chooses to do so in order to escape a life of an orphanage, and to escape the future of having to work in a mining town, chooses to join this group. When he joins this group, he is warned on several different occasions by his sister, by those speaking through radio programs, by the owner of the orphanage not to do it because there are terrible things coming if he does. However, because this truth is uncomfortable for him, he chooses to ignore it. He moves forward and accepts the responsibility of acting for Hitler and his followers. The trouble is that as he does this, he makes choices along the way that are seemingly more comfortable than the truth he originally rejected, which is that he made the wrong choice. We see this as a microcosm for our own world, for the decisions that we make. We constantly make decisions that are comfortable for us, things that make the most sense, or in other words, things that we want to accept, whether or not they're true. The trouble with this is, in the same way that Werner made a choice that not only impacted him as an individual, but those around him, leading to the death of several hundred people, people that he forgot about shortly thereafter. In the same way that this impacted them, we make choices every single day that impact people around us. We make choices that hurt or hinder people. We make choices that could potentially help people. In this way, if we choose to reject truth, if we choose to be selectively blind in the way that he was, we run the risk of inhibiting ourselves from helping those around us and ourselves. Thank you.
One of my favorite quotes from the Book of the Courtier is, "Outward beauty is a true sign of inner goodness," only because I know how false this statement can be. Someone can be very beautiful on the outside and completely harsh and cruel on the inside. Similarly, someone can be a certain way online and be a completely different person in person. Members of the court or the courtiers during the Renaissance period had to gain a number of good traits in order to contribute to the overall image of the monarch and to gain political authority. But sometimes that image was actually a front. I think we also try to gain a number of good traits or good posts to put on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter in order to portray a certain image online. And sometimes, unfortunately, that is also a front. While most of our time online can be spent for good, some of it is also being used to portray an artificial appearance and to deduce each other into an online profile. One example of this can be found in the app called Tinder, which is a new dating app in where you're presented with a series of pictures of singles in your area, and you can either swipe right if you like them or swipe left if you don't. If someone you likes your picture back, you can start talking. The problem with this, I think, is that in that person that you see on your phone, they become the swipe right or they become the swipe left. Essentially, they become a disposable good that we can swipe away rather than a human being. Now, I don't want to dismiss online communication and interaction so quickly and so negatively, because I do think online communication and interaction is a good thing, and we can use it to connect to other people. One example, using the same thing as Tinder, we can see it's successful in one of my friends who's getting married to someone she met on Tinder next month. She has a cute Facebook profile picture that says, "Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm so glad I swiped right for you." As you can see, there are disadvantages and advantages to using online communication, just as there was advantages and disadvantages for the courtiers who had to gain and achieve a certain kind of image. On one hand, the courtiers, it was an actual artificial appearance, but at the same time, they used their good traits to serve other people and to gain favor of men. And I think that we can do the same thing with our online appearances and our personal image. We can use those to gain favor of men or serve people and ultimately show our inner goodness. We can use the web as a connecting web and stop swiping each other away, but it's definitely up to us and how we use it and how we treat each other. Thank you.
Dad nothing, out cold. A big bump and a strange sense of nostalgia.
crumpled in a broken, delirious heap before the gates of the farmhouse. Time passed in uneven flashes as I drifted in and out of consciousness. So why in the world are characters in young adult novels always getting knocked out? This was the question I chose to try to find an answer for my research paper. In order to do this, I went to the YALSA 2015 Top 10 Young Adult Fiction book list and tried to figure out what patterns authors were following. Turns out 7 of these 10 books feature unconsciousness, and the quotes I read earlier were from 4 of these novels. So as I was looking for patterns and similarities among these novels, I realized that authors really use 3 key ways, or they use unconsciousness in 3 key ways to move along the plot and shape the characters. The first way is just as a plot device. For example, it's much easier in the story of Owen, Dragon Slayer of Trondheim, for the author to have the narrator get knocked out, wake up in a hospital, and have his friends explain to him exactly what happened and how the helicopter rescued them, rather than going through all the tedious details of the rescue and the burning fire and all of the drama. So in that sense, unconsciousness acts as a very clean way to move from one plot point to another. Another way that unconsciousness is used as a sort of symbolic rebirth or call to action. This is seen in the story of Van Gogh, where he goes to this mysterious island and discovers all these monks living there. Once he's discovered, he's drugged and then wakes up back home. But at this point in time, his curiosity is piqued, and he decides to go back to the island, and because of this, he discovers a lot of secrets that force him to kind of reconfront his simple life and sends him on an adventure during the time period of World War II. So unconsciousness acts as this barrier between old life and new life that causes the main characters to reassess their lives and values. The last way is using unconsciousness to characterize the characters in a unique way. This is seen in Noggin, as Travis has a severe case of cancer, and so his parents decide to take drastic measures and remove his head, freeze it, and have it placed on someone else's body 5 years in the future. In this Rip Van Winkle style, he has to confront life and adolescence in a completely new way that wouldn't be possible without this moment of unconsciousness. So each of these books uses unconsciousness, being knocked out, or passing out in a different situation in order to shape or support the plot. Even though there may not be one clear answer as to why authors use this, it's obvious that it serves a plethora of purposes depending on the content and context of the novel. Thank you.
So the handsome devil in the middle of this photograph is John Y. Nelson. He was a frontiersman on the American West, and here he is with his wife and family. So John Y. Nelson, you may not have heard of him before, but I promise he has affected you because he was a frontier storyteller. He moved out west when he was only a teenager, and he just decided to be part of an Indian tribe. And what I mean is he sat in a teepee and wouldn't move unless they let him stay. So that's how his frontier life started, and he actually did a lot of really neat things out there. He interpreted and scouted for the U.S. Army, he helped settlers and ranchers, he led the Mormons to Utah, and even later in life he was in Buffalo Bill's Wild West exhibition. So he's really interesting, yes, but again, why is he important? Well, let me tell you. I ran into Nelson when I found his autobiography called 50 Years on the Trail, and I realized that there was some value here. And so I studied it, I made footnotes for it, I wrote a critical introduction for it, and I collected appendix materials. And after all of this research, I came to realize something. This book was basically a bunch of baloney, and he probably made most of it up. So I found this out while looking into his claim to leading the Mormons to Utah. And he said that Brigham Young approached him personally, saying that they would never make it to their destination unless he was there to guide them across the desert. I know, it's juicy. And then I found a Millennial Star blurb, which was an LDS contemporary newspaper, and the blurb was talking about Nelson's book. And let me tell you that the Mormons did not like it, not one bit. And they said that his story was utterly without foundation in fact, and that the Mormons were not pioneered to the Salt Lake Valley by anyone but the God of heaven. So, after realizing this, I looked at Nelson's book, and I realized that it may be a bunch of baloney, but it was baloney worth celebrating. Because Nelson was taking part in an important and frontier tradition, which was storytelling, and all the best frontiersmen were storytellers. He was simply taking part in a larger story, and that larger story is a frontier myth. And that frontier myth is what we now base our cultural identity on. So wait, we base our identity on lies? No, that's not what I'm saying. Well, sort of. What I mean is, it's basically making poetical mountains out of historical molehills. And what Nelson really did is he helped paint this vision of the American West that we as Americans just love. And all these storytellers, these frontier storytellers, they all helped create and mold our country's identity, and I think for the better. So I'd like to thank Nelson for telling his stories, whether they were true or not. Thank you.
I am a self-professed Jane Austen fangirl, and I am not ashamed of that. I'm actually very proud of it. So for my project, for my 495 capstone project, I decided that I wanted to talk about Jane Austen. And as I sort of got going, I doubted myself a little bit because Jane Austen, like, could I have picked anything more overdone than Jane Austen? But then I found the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is probably the newest adaptation of Pride and Prejudice that's out there right now. It was released on YouTube in 2012. And it centers around the life of Elizabeth Bennet and her sisters and her friends. And as I kind of started analyzing the Lizzie Bennet Diaries and looking at them and enjoying them, I asked myself, what is it about Pride and Prejudice? Why do we keep making these adaptations? Why do we still care? And as I kind of got into that, I realized that that's a really hard question to answer and that I was never going to come up with a good definitive answer to why we keep making Pride and Prejudice adaptations. And so a better question I decided would be, what are we getting from these new adaptations? What are they still bringing to the table? And in the case of the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, the most unique and interesting thing that they do is they change the narrative style and they employ what I like to call multimedia adaptation format, which basically just means that instead of just having one medium as you would see in a novel or a film, they employ many different types of media to tell the story. So the videos originally came out on YouTube, but they also used Twitter. A lot of the characters had Twitter accounts and Facebook pages that you could use to follow the story more closely and even interact with the characters. Elizabeth would sometimes post Q&A videos on YouTube in between the regular episodes, and people, actual viewers would submit questions like, what do you want to do with your major? What are you hoping, when are you hoping to graduate? And that really helped drive the story because audience participation is essential to a good story. And in that way, doing those Q&A videos and having those Twitter feeds that people could actively follow really allowed more room for audience participation in this adaptation, which is, I think, the most important thing that it does and the most unique thing that it does. The audience participation tradition goes back hundreds of years. The best example is probably Shakespeare. He would put on these enormous shows that were more like rock concerts than anything else. People would boo and cheer and laugh and do whatever they felt like. They were actively involved in the show, and the more involved you were, the more interesting it was. The perfect moment for participating with this particular adaptation has passed because, it was a couple years ago that it originally came out, but there are more coming out, and if you have the chance to participate in one of these multimedia adaptations, I would encourage you to do so. Thank you.
Before getting onto her bippity-boppity work, Disney's 1950 godmother seems to have lost her wand. She looks for it under the bench. She shakes out her dress. Oh, I forgot. I put it away. Moments later, she smiles benignly and nods to send Cinderella off to the ball, still dressed in her rags, before realizing, oh, good heavens, child, you can't go to the ball dressed like that. So our round friend is a little bit absent-minded at times, but she leaves us with an iconic image of fairy godmothers, that they are chubby and cheery. Fast forward now to 2015. For actress Helena Bonham Carter, Disney got rid of the rounded body type, but not the round dress. But Carter takes the pumpkin into the greenhouse to turn it into a coach, and then is nearly squashed by the pumpkin's enlargement. Why didn't she think that one through? So Disney got rid of her rounded body type, but what did they have left? It was the ditziness. Is this airheaded round godmother just a Disney thing? No. From 1950 to 2016, from animation to live action, from Disney to non-Disney, my research finds that most fairy godmothers are either fat or stupid, but more often than not, they are a combination of both. There are a few exceptions to this rule. We have the godmothers from The Slipper and the Rose and the Three Rodgers and Hammerstein. They all fall into this category of fit fairies. Not only are they smart, but they also share the fit, idealized body type. And you know something else? They get more screen time than their fat fairy counterparts. So what are we to make of all this? Fit fairies or fat fairies? This increased screen time is problematic because it reinforces our fat-hating culture. It pits the fit bodies against the fat bodies, the smart against the airheaded. Marilyn Wan, leading fat studies researcher, says that the fat-hating culture affects all of us, obese, anorexic, or even skinny, because it gives us the fear that we will all get fat. By giving them more screen time, the ideal fit body type is depicted not only as the ideal, but also the norm. Now we have a large variety of media, so you would think that we would have a large variety of body types with every possible personality combination. But fairy godmothers on TV show us that we don't have this variety, that we are watching and therefore believing in only the negative connotations of fat fairies. Thank you.
In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution legally abolished slavery in the United States. But 75 years later, Richard Wright still described blacks as white property in his novel Native Son. Now, I read this book in 2015, and I noticed images like the ones on the screen all over the media. So I asked myself, when one race experiences a disproportionate amount of violence, who is responsible? Native Son forces us to confront this question in uncomfortable ways. In the novel, Bigger Thomas, a black man, is guilty of murdering a white woman in a very aggressive manner. But we soon realize that his violence is just part of a larger cycle of black violence that begins with white objectification of blacks. In the setting of Chicago in the 1940s, the only freedom afforded blacks comes from buying into restrictions that are imposed upon them by whites. Soon, blacks begin to view themselves and are viewed by whites as less than human. As you can imagine, this objectification is very painful, and blacks respond to this pain through blindness. The main character, Bigger, sees this blindness in his family members and friends, and he refuses to be blind. He's embarrassed by this and becomes ashamed. And to rid himself of blindness and shame, he turns to the only outlet afforded him, and that is violence. When violence gives someone meaning and identity who has only experienced shame and objectification, we have to re-examine the way that we typically think of violence. We have to ask ourselves, who is really responsible for perpetuating that violence? Ultimately, Bigger's violence results in state-legislated white mob violence and the death penalty for Bigger. So we also realize that in the society of Native Son, and to some extent in our society today, black violence is not afforded the same protection that white violence receives. So I asked myself, as a 23-year-old white woman living in this culture of violence, might I contribute to the cycle of black violence in ways that I hadn't previously thought? Ultimately, I decided that the way that I interact with diversity, not just of race, but also of religion, of gender, even just of opinion, is significant because it affects this cycle. And that's why the message of Native Son is still relevant, because it forces us, white or black, to examine our role in the cycle of black violence that persists today. Thank you.
So, anyone who's babysat children for longer than 15 minutes knows that adulthood is a destination these kids can't get to fast enough. Adulthood is where you learn to not physically attack someone because they burned your bagel bites. So, to the delight of scholars and babysitters everywhere, my study of William Golding's Lord of the Flies through the lens of Sigmund Freud seeks to prove that it is actually unsuppressed childish tendencies that bring about destruction in society, not a loss of innocence usually associated with adulthood. So my research is based on the idea of the anti-human, which was established by Immanuel Kant in the late 18th century. He said that enlightenment was man's emergence from his own self-incurred immaturity, which basically means that humans aren't as great as they thought they were. Then came Sigmund Freud, and his work took it a step further. Humans were driven by instincts or by urges, and they were made out to be something more akin to an animal than a human. And while dropping Freud's name today probably won't win you a lot of points, using his work in conjunction with Golding's actually makes a lot of sense. Freud was still a very big contender in the realm of the human psyche when Golding was publishing, making their work compatible, if not necessarily contemporary. So, where do we find Sigmund on the island in Lord of the Flies? One of the first instances is found in the way the boys revel in being dirty, which is one of the first stages of sexual development, according to Freud. In one scene, Ralph, the leader of the boys, tries to tell the others where the lavatory should be, but they ignore him. They laugh at his insistence, even though they're old enough to know the consequences of their literal dirty habits. And then in another scene, after the boys have killed the sow, they cover themselves in her blood, but it's more for sport than for sustenance. Another element of a Freudian society is what he calls sublimation, things like art or music, usually produced by adults once they realize that society can't function based on instinct alone. The boys attempt something like this. They cover themselves in war paint, but when they do it, it's for selfish reasons, to hide themselves as they hunt first the animals on the island and then each other. And this, combined with their lack of a desire to keep clean, makes it so they can't run a functional society. Now, the functional society for Freud is based on the idea of the adult, or the suppression of childish tendencies, which is evident in the character of Piggy. He, before he's murdered by the rest of the boys, asks them, what are the grown-ups going to think? Which suggests that society has to be based on adult measures. However, in this instance, childhood wins out over adulthood, and Piggy is pushed to his death by the rest of the boys. And this makes up the bulk of my research, the focus on cleanliness, sublimation, and adult-imposed order as the hallmarks of society, which evidently children threaten, at least in Lord of the Flies. But now we have to ask ourselves, what role does the anti-human play in the humanities? Isn't this exactly what we decided not to study when we came to BYU? Well, that's not exactly it. See, if we really seek to understand the human experience, we've got to start at the very beginning, at childhood, rather than just looking at the products of adults. As we do so, we're going to get a non-biased look at what it means to be a human, figure out why kids are so obsessed with bagel bites, or maybe more realistically, what it really means to be a human, to see the darkness of man's heart. Thank you.
So introducing Slaughterhouse-Five to my class, my professor described it as, it's this weird combination because it's kind of science fiction because there's aliens, but then it's kind of a memoir because it's dealing with Vonnegut's experience as a POW in Dresden during this firebombing. And then he continued saying, now you've probably never have heard about this firebombing of Dresden, but it's this horrible Allied attack during World War II that killed hundreds of thousands of refugees in this city. And I had never heard of this. I needed to know more. And I had just done a study abroad and we had been to Germany, and I could not imagine an entire town being decimated like this. And so I needed more information. Plus, in the first chapter of Slaughterhouse-Five, Vonnegut is expressing the need for more information about this act that he survived. And so I started to research. And in my research, I found that there was articles published about Dresden bombing right after the event in 1943. And there was a wide variety of information that was very biased and very extreme. So not a lot of information there. And then in the 60s, there was whole books written about this event. And they were very inaccurate. The most famous being David Irving's book, The Destruction of Dresden, where he famously just added a couple zeros to the end of the victim count, making it seem larger than it actually was. And this concerned me so much. What was I supposed to do with this information? What was Vonnegut supposed to do in this information? This is the period he's writing in. And so I found that Vonnegut is creating truth for himself about this event he went through his book, through his story. There's aliens in this book. He is not concerned about historical fact. He's concerned about story. And this example from this in Slaughterhouse-Five is this character of Billy Pilgrim, Vonnegut's double. He is talking to this other character of Rumford, who's a very historical fact. He is quoting David Irving's book. He's quoting these inaccurate facts, and he is basically the historical guy. And to this, all Billy Pilgrim says is, I want you to know I was there. We don't ever have to talk about it, but I want you to know I was there. And for me, this was Billy Pilgrim, this was Vonnegut saying, don't look at the history, put that aside. Listen to me, listen to my story, listen to my truth, because I have truth that I can give from this experience. And for me, the truth is that empathy is needed, dignity is needed. When you go through these acts of horror and bad things, you just need to learn empathy. And I saw that Vonnegut was almost saying, you can learn these historical truths, but it's more important what you learn from them and what you learn from their stories as well. Thank you.
In spite of all that Katniss Everdeen accomplishes in her time of the dueling ring that is the Hunger Games, the main debate amongst teenagers for whom the book was written is, who will Katniss Everdeen pick as her boyfriend? May the odds ever be in your favor. Instead of being seen for the powerhouse of a woman that she is, she becomes a victim of the misogynistic view that a woman is only defined by the man she chooses to marry. And she's only 16 years old. Suzanne Collins did not write a character that fawns over boys. She instead wrote a character that does anything she can to provide for her family, a character that befriends a tribute of a different race, a character that saves a fellow tribute from certain death. She is a woman that fights for equality for all races and for all genders. But what the online blogs and magazines that teenagers read want to know is Team PETA or Team Gale. PopCrush.com needed to know your vote in this debate because they were stressed out about it. TeenVote.com did a slideshow depicting the actors playing PETA and Gale and asked for your vote at the end. YALSA, The Hub, Hollywire.com, The Huffington Post, Vulture.com, Teen.com, TeenReads.com, and Elle Magazine, a magazine that caters to mostly adult women, all published something about this debate. A YouTube video done by the Fine brothers called Teenagers React to the Hunger Games asked teenagers about this debate, and every single teenager, including the boys, had a very quick answer. As you can imagine, for my research for this paper, I had to go to the third page of my Google search to find anything that wasn't related to PETA or Gale. You know you're desperate when you go to the second page, and you're completely out of ideas when you go to the third. In action or fantasy novels with male protagonists, the women are either damsels in distress, girls back home, or completely invisible. The men are not defined by the woman that they choose, but are instead defined by their choices and actions. In spite of her heroesque abilities, because of her gender, Katniss Everdeen is doomed to become a Cinderella or a Sleeping Beauty. The story only ends when she has a man. Until women can be seen as equals, all of their actions and their abilities will be seen through the veil of inferiority. Thank you.
Absolutely amazing. Let's give another round of applause for all of our presenters. All right, so once again, We need everybody to have a yellow ballot. If you don't raise your hand, we have some more, and we have some pencils for you to fill out this ballot. We ask you to fill it out as quickly as possible. We're going to collect them, and in 15 minutes, we will be announcing the winner of this competition. So again, fill out your ballots, get them back to us, and as our last presenter just said, may the odds ever be in your favor.